coming to bitterness, let's say, or anger. And so I would see myself, yes, as in the moderately unhappy business.
Why I ask is that happiness seems to be a bit of a catchphrase at the moment. One could actually say there is a happiness industry, a global happiness industry. And in fact, the British Prime Minister has put a lot of store, and Britain actually has a happiness index. Do you think this is interesting to measure on a national level?
Look, I think it's interesting to go beyond merely economic indicators of whether something is working well or not. You know, and there are strange statistics, so that if a couple gets divorced, the economic indicator suggests that the country is getting richer because lawyers are being involved, a new house will be built, etc. Whereas at a human level, obviously this is a failure. So I think a statistic that recognizes the rise and fall of personal fulfillment rather than merely the rise and fall of income seems an important measure to have.
But do you think it's a measure as a country, in terms of a country as a whole? For example, I think the Scots describe themselves quite frequently, not all of them of course, as a nation of miserable people. Some could actually say that might apply to some English people as well. But is it useful to categorise whole countries like that? No, but I think you can see that, for example, if you build a new motorway, that motorway may help people to get to work faster, but at the same time it will blight the lives of those around it. So you can start doing happiness audits on the value of building that motorway. And it may be that on second considerations, maybe you shouldn't build that motorway because the ultimate, the net result in terms of levels of happiness will actually be lower. So you can come up with interesting policy consequences by paying closer attention not just to monetary values but to more human psychological ones. What about the concept of change? We always live in a changing world. I mean, they did in the Industrial Revolution as well, but we're constantly being told that we have to change. Do you think it's possible for individuals to change?
Look, I think that the change of industry and technology all around us is very dizzying. And while it's exciting, it also leaves in many of us a longing for calm. I think there's never been in history a longing for calm as intense as there is now. You know, you hear everybody saying that what they would most like maybe is an hour a day when there is no distraction. We're having a terrible time staying focused. We can now see why people invented monasteries. You know, monasteries were invented so that you could get away from the distraction of daily life in order to think of the important things. And for centuries, one would think, well, what was the point of that? You know, couldn't you just do that in a quiet room in the kitchen? But the point is now, as daily life is becoming ever more complex, more and more people are realizing that a kind of that inner focus is highly valuable.
How do you personally find quiet times, find calm?
I wait till the middle of the night, and I find that as a thinker, my most original and courageous thoughts only come once everybody else has gone to bed. Because while the whole city is alive and awake, there's a part of my mind that's essentially always trying to be a bit too normal, as though I want my thoughts to be in line with the thoughts of everyone else. It's like I have a conformist mind. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm just totally conformist in my mind. But at 3 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of the night, suddenly it's time for those wilder thoughts to emerge. And in some of those are the seeds of some interesting projects. So I would recommend to everybody, insomniacs and those who are not so insomniacs, to make a bit of time for the very late at night or the very early morning when a lot of people are still asleep. That's when we can confront bits of ourselves that are quite shy during the rest of the day and yet which hold the key often to our own development.
Personally speaking, I couldn't stay up until 3 a.m. I wondered, do you feel that sleep is overrated? Look,
sleep is deeply important to physical well-being. We wouldn't be able to cope with many of the challenges that life throws at us without the resourcefulness that sleep gives us. That said, yes, as I say, I'm aware in myself that some of the best discoveries and lines and bits of books that I've ever come across have been precisely at those moments when I've gnawed away at the standard sleeping calendar.
So how many hours would you say you sleep a night?
Well, I sleep in bits and bobs, so I might be awake between 3 and 5, and then I'm not going to get through the day, but I'll try and fit in a siesta at some point in the afternoon. And I used to feel very guilty about this. I thought, oh, I'm one of these writers, I'm really becoming decadent, I'm losing the plot here. But I now realise that, you can be at your desk at 9 o'clock in a suit and not doing any real work. And similarly, you can be in your pyjamas at 3 in the morning and actually things are really firing. So it's really working according to when you're productive rather than when it looks like you should be working.
You mentioned work, and probably of all your books that you've written, the book on work, working life, in a little poll I did, probably had the most divergent number of views. I wonder, you were brought up, I understand that your father was quite a wealthy financier. Did he inculcate in terms of his own life the need, the importance for work?
Yes, I grew up in a self-made family that had come from great hardship, and luckily in his later years my father was able to make money, but the feeling was, as we were growing up, that we were on our last penny all the time. And
were you really?
Well, not on the last penny, but we didn't have a huge amount of money, and my father had been very traumatized by early poverty. And I think anyone who knows that sort of background will know what it does to people, which is to make money seem very important. And I think that it's been a fascinating theme for me in my own writing to explore how people make money, what money means to them, and the anxieties that surround the making of money. I wrote a book a few years ago called Status Anxiety, which was really about how people in the prosperous world find that they're traumatized by constant worries about their position in the social hierarchy, even though no one's going to starve.
So in terms of working, when you wrote the book about the joys and sorrows of work, you travelled very widely. You had to obviously interview a lot of people in that project. Was that something that you actually enjoyed? In a sense, you're kind of getting your hands dirty, having to seek out other opinions as opposed to reading and coming up with your own.
Yes, look, in the modern world, most of us are stuck within a particular profession, often chosen at a very early age, and then you stay in that profession. And I think one of the most fascinating things is to have a bit of a job share or a job swap when we look at what other people are doing, because you learn so much. We tend to think that in order to learn, we should go travelling. And travelling teaches you lots, but there's nothing quite as good in terms of teaching you how the world works than to do somebody else's job for them or alongside them. And my book on work, I shadowed and worked alongside a huge range of people, everything from Maldivian fishermen to accountants in a large accountancy firm, to rocket scientists in French Guyana, a deliberately eclectic range, asking myself all the time a very basic question, which is, what does work mean to them? How are they seeing their work? How is money, status, and the intrinsic enjoyment of the job playing itself out in that particular career? So it was a kind of travel log through the world of work.
But did you come to a conclusion in terms of seeing someone perhaps doing a job that you personally wouldn't have liked to have done, say someone working in a biscuit factory or something like that? Do you see that work as being valuable to that person?
I think I came to all sorts of conclusions about when people like their work and when they don't. I think one of the central things that people want from work is a feeling of autonomy. Even more important in a sense than money is a feeling that you are in control of your own destiny. And if people are confronted by a choice between a very large salary but a horrible structure where their life is constantly meddled with, their decisions are interfered with, they're not giving any respect, and a much more modest salary where they feel in charge, most people would choose the latter. I think there's a tremendous hunger in all of us also for a sense of meaning in work, to create work that in some way either helps somebody to find pleasure and joy in life or else reduces their suffering. If a job does that, you're well on the way towards work fulfillment.
Does it annoy you that you constantly get references to your father, who was a multi-millionaire?
No, because my father was not a multimillionaire in the standard sense. He made some money towards the end of his life. I wasn't part of his wealth-making part of his life. And I've always made my own career. I published my first book at the age of 23. And, the real joy for me is to see ordinary readers pick up my work and myself making a living from that. I think that all writers know that however nice it is to have readers on a blog or readers on a Twitter feed, what really matters is the capacity for somebody to pay for your work. It's a very moving, very emotional thing. Someone will say, "I bought your book." And that's really saying, what you're doing matters to me, so much that I've paid $20 in order to acquire it.
Why do you, as a writer, as an individual, participate in social media?
Well, I've become quite interested in Twitter, and I've always been interested in the short form, the aphorism, the maxim, the ability to summon up a complex idea in just a sentence. And when I discovered Twitter, I thought, well, this is the perfect place to write aphorisms. People use Twitter in all sorts of ways. I use it to write aphorisms, reflections on life, not so much my own life, but life in general. And I found, much to my pleasure, that people really enjoy them. And I now have lots and lots of people who are there every morning wanting to know some thoughts. Look, as a writer, it's a wonderful tool to try something out. You can try out an idea, publish it in 30 seconds, and see what the response is. The normal publishing schedule is 3 years. This is 3 seconds. And so that has real advantages.
I've read that going back to your father again, that he said or thought that at some level inherited privilege kills ambition and talent. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would agree. I think that to be given anything that you haven't earned is psychologically troubling and guilt-inducing and saps talent. It's like a woman being told that the reason why a man is interested in her is her looks. Now, most women at that situation would think, I don't really want you to be interested in my looks. I want you to be interested in the deeper part of me. Or a famous pop star will be told, look, the reason I've fallen in love with you is because you're really famous, right? These external things, fame, money, looks, while they're in some ways satisfying, they don't satisfy the deepest wish of all of us, which is to be recognized for things that we've actually done ourselves, the deeper self, rather than superficial things that surround us.
And yet this issue of fame, and in fact fame breeding famous offspring, is something that just seems to go on and on and on. Why isn't it that people don't seem to learn, in a sense, from their mistakes?
Look, I think the desire for fame is a slightly pathological one. I think it arises often from a feeling of needing to show someone or somebody that you exist, and that people who've tended to want to be famous most actively have also tended to be the ones who deep down have felt most invisible. Take someone like Michael Jackson, humiliated by his father, bullied by his father, made to feel the weakling, etc., who wanted to show the world something back. And I think the goal as a parent should be to show your children enough love, enough respect, that they don't, in later life, hunger for fame in an indiscriminating way. Of course, they might want to achieve things, and they should achieve things, but I think there's a difference between wanting to achieve for its own sake, for intrinsic qualities, and wanting to achieve simply to gain the adulation of the crowd, which I think is a dangerous phenomenon and a sign of something not having quite gone right.
What do you think you have learnt most from having children?
I've learnt how strange childhood is as a state. It's part of a feature of becoming an adult that you forget what it was like to be a child. You have photos, etc. People tell you the odd anecdote, but you don't really remember what it was like to be a child. And I think the best parents are those who can make the huge effort to remember what it must feel like, who try and empathize with their children. I think when you're a child, adults are very big and very scary and have huge power. With $20 in their pockets, they are, King Croesus, and they're huge, they're physically big. And there's an awful lot of an abuse of parental power in relation to children. I'm not talking about the grosser forms of abuse, just everyday abuse. And as a parent, yeah, I struggle very hard to understand my children, to give them boundaries, but most of all, to give them a lot of love, to make them feel that I'm interested. And that means getting interested in some pretty strange stuff, like, Thomas the Tank Engine, or the flags of the world, or, an Airfix model, things that are very far. The fascinating thing as a parent having children is that you end up being deeply, spending a lot of time with things that, in a way, don't matter to you for yourself. They matter to you because they matter to somebody that you love. So they're an education in what it might be to love. We grow up with an idea that love means having a crush on someone and finding someone very beautiful. By the time we've got children, we realize that really love is about sacrifice, love is about empathy, love is about giving someone something they really need, even if it's not something you want to give them spontaneously, but you see the point in it and you love them, so you give it to them.
You mentioned love, and of course that was the topic of your first book, and in fact the first thing of yours that I read, I think I must have read the American version because it was called On Love. But one thing I've wondered why you've never written a book about death, for example, because obviously it preoccupies a lot of people whether we talk openly about it or not.
Well, look, hopefully I've got a few years left in me, and as that topic...
I wasn't suggesting
No,
otherwise.
of course. But as that topic comes closer to me in a biological sense, I'm sure it will interest me more. Look, I think death never goes away. Most books are at some level about death, or have got death sort of thrumming away in the background. But yes, I think it's something I'm going to get more interested in.
Okay. I want to move on to some of your entrepreneurial pursuits. You opened the School of Life in 2008. From the website, it looks like that's some kind of a walk-in therapy centre. I wonder, how has this gone down in Britain?
Well, I've always been interested in guidance and in finding ideas by which we can live, helpful ideas. It doesn't necessarily mean cheering ideas, but just ideas that can console and guide and nurture. And I've done this in books. I've done this in last 15 books. And at a certain point I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to create a space that would have some of the values in my books, but it would be a physical space, it would be a teaching space, it would have therapy, it would have a dining room, it would have eating, it would be a space of friendship. And we found a very simple shop in the middle of London, next to a hairdresser and a kebab shop. And this is the home of the School of Life, which in this very ordinary setting delivers instruction in the great challenges of life, be they how to find a partner, how to deal with a troublesome relationship, how to cope with the workplace, how to deal with the illness or death of a loved one. These are the things that trouble us all, but weirdly, there are not that many answers out there. And so we make the answers, we deliver the answers, we hope to speak to people who come see us in a measured, adult, a grown-up, but still human and often humorous voice. And it's been a great success. One of the fascinating things we've discovered is that at least a third of almost all our classes have Australians in them. And this led us to all sorts of conclusions. And I'm happy to say that in 2012 we will be opening a branch of the School of Life in, we're not sure whether it will be Melbourne or Sydney or both, but certainly we will have a presence in Australia later on in 2012.
So what have you concluded by the fact that a third of the people who go there are Australians?
That Australians have always loved my books, and they've loved this thing of the School of Life, and I think that tells you something about the Australian spirit. Australians are curious. They want new ideas. They're open. People say Australia is a young country, and they often mean that in all kinds of areas. But I think Australia is intellectually very young in the sense that they are open to new concepts and willing to try stuff out, and very unelitist. The way I write is totally unelitist. I take a lot of trouble to get rid of any academic associations. I was trained in an academic way, but at a certain point I thought, it's too easy doing this, footnoting, trying to sound clever. But the far harder thing is to take a risk of sounding clear, even if some people go, oh, that's a bit simple-minded. I'd much rather that, to try and put away learning, speak in a direct voice. And I think in this country, as in others, people really appreciate that. People appreciate someone who's not merely showing off his learning for the sake of it.
Often people, when they look for books about guidance, whether they're one of your books or a more obvious self-help kind of books, there's almost an embarrassment about doing it. Do you understand why people feel perhaps a bit weak or vulnerable if they search out that kind of literature?
Look, there's good and bad reasons to be suspicious of self-help books. Most self-help books are written by Americans and peddle a kind of over-optimistic, rather dangerous philosophy of complete fulfillment. You will find totally, you will become as rich as Croesus, you will have a perfect sex life, all will go well, etc. I think that stuff is almost dangerous. Nevertheless, if I were to defend the concept of a self-help book is really any book which aims to make you feel better by the end of it. So if we broaden the category, War and Peace is a self-help book. The plays of Shakespeare are self-help. The essays of Aristotle are self-help. All the great works of culture, taken at their most serious, have aimed to guide us towards living and dying. I think that we need guidance. We need sources of guidance. It's simply not possible to get through this life without moments of serious reversal and doubt and crisis, where our friends around us might just not have the answers. We need something a little stiffer, a little better thought through. And if you happen not to be religious, as many of us are not these days, the real question is, where do you go? I think you should go to works of culture, but the way in which these works are presented, be it in bookshops or by the university system, often makes us feel, it can't really be for me. And this is a lot of my energy as a writer, trying to break down some of these artificial barriers and trying to get the nourishment that I think lies in works of culture to a proper audience.
Well, that brings us on to your latest book, Religion for Atheists. I wonder, you say that no existing mainstream secular institution has declared an interest in teaching us the art of living, as you've just said. I wonder, do you think the teaching of ethics in schools is an adequate replacement?
I'm very interested in this issue of whether ethics should be taught in schools. I know that in Australia there's a debate about whether ethics should be taught within a religious curriculum or could it exist outside of a religious curriculum. I think there's almost a bigger question, which is, does it work to sit a group of 8-year-olds or 12-year-olds or 15-year-olds and have a teacher teach ethics? Is that the way? And my feeling is it's not the whole story. If you want to create an ethical society, you can't just do it in the classroom. You've got to do it everywhere. Religions know this. You have to create an ethical environment that goes from what's on the television at night to what's on the billboards, by the motorway, to what people are doing in offices. Morality in an ethical sense is a holistic process. You can't just do it neatly, age 15, pour in some ethics and hope that it's going to stick for a 40-year career in management consultancy or farming or dentistry. People, what we really mean by ethics, let's strip away. Really what we mean by ethics is being nice, right? Can we teach being nice? As you know, as I know, we all have aggressive, mean, envious, treacherous sides to us, and if those sides are given encouragement, we'll egg it on. And if we're surrounded in an environment where people around us are basically saying, look, try to be nice, try to be gentle, don't dig the knife in, then we'll try and do that. But we need an environment. We need a good moral environment. And so I'm suspicious of thinking it can all just be done in a school.
So is the answer, as your book also proposes, an adult star chart?
Well, children have star charts where their behavior is monitored and people say, oh, fantastic, you just did a really nice thing, let's give you a star. Once we get into adulthood, especially in things like marriages, people often talk quite rudely towards one another because no one's watching. So there'll be dismissive comments, sarcastic comments, bitter comments. There'll be anger that hasn't been digested. There'll be resentments that haven't been aired. And I do think that even though it's private life, it behoves the whole of the community to think about this, because how people get on in couples and get on with children and get on in offices is the stuff of everyone. And we're not quite getting it right. Society builds fantastic supercomputers and smartphones, etc., and we can put men on the moon, but at the level of dealing a man and a woman and a woman, and a man dealing together with their problems, it remains pretty challenging.
So you're advocating religion without God?
I'm an atheist and have always been an atheist, and have no interest in the spirit or in anything supernatural. But as I get older, I realize that religions have a lot of things in them, a lot of wisdom, you could say, that has nothing to do with the supernatural and that is available to the most fierce atheists. I'm thinking about rituals that go on all the time in religions. Take something like the Jewish Day of Atonement. Judaism, once a year, says that we should say sorry to people. We should atone for the things we've done wrong, and we should offer our apologies to others and accept their apologies with good grace. Now, that's got nothing really to do with God. It takes place in a synagogue, but you could do that anywhere. So that's an example to me of how religions are often psychologically pretty wise about stuff that because we're atheists, if you're an atheist, you'll think, oh, nothing to do with religion for me. But in a way, the non-existence of God is at the end of the day not the non-existence of everything to do with religion. It's merely one thing. And I think for me, religions are ultimately too wise, complex, rich, to be abandoned simply to those who happen to believe in them. They're for everybody, not least non-believers.